Xander Kane's hands clenched around the control panel as he stared at the flickering screens. The message was clear, and his heart sank as he read it again. The council had made their demand, leave Earth's children alone. For a moment, the words seemed to blur, a haze of impossible decisions and cold directives. Earth, the planet his ancestors had fought for, the one he had sworn to protect. And now, it seemed, humanity was caught in the crosshairs of an enemy it barely understood. Damn them, Xander muttered under his breath, his voice rough with anger. The once feared soldier of the Galactic Council, now an outlaw, had seen many things in his time. But this was personal. Years ago, his daughter, Lila, had been taken by the Council. Her power, which they called a gift, was the very thing that had sealed her fate. They had told him she was chosen, but they hadn't told him why. No one ever told him why his daughter's existence was so important to their cold, calculating empire. Xander's fingers tapped against the cold, metallic surface of the console as a flood of memories rushed in. Lila's innocent face, her bright smile, her laughter before everything changed. He remembered her first flicker of power, the way she had shifted the objects in her room with a simple thought. At the time, it seemed harmless, even adorable. But the Council had other plans. They saw her as a weapon, not a child. He turned away from the screens and glanced over his shoulder, where his ragtag crew was preparing for what was to come. They had all been through the fires of war, fought battles that left them scarred, both inside and out. And yet, they were still here, because they believed in something that few others did. They believed that Earth had the right to exist on its own terms, to define its future free of galactic interference. Xander didn't need to turn around to know they were watching him. He could feel their eyes on his back. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. "What now?" asked Eris, a former Council soldier who had defected after a mission gone wrong. She was tall, broad-shouldered, with a look of defiance in her eyes that had been there since the day she joined Xander's cause. Eris had been with him for years, ever since she had seen the hypocrisy of the Council firsthand. She didn't just fight for freedom, she fought because she had nothing else to live for. "We don't back down," Xander replied, his voice low but filled with conviction. He let out a heavy sigh, reaching for the communication device. "We're going to save them. Every last one of Earth's children." The room fell silent. No one spoke for a moment. The weight of their mission hung heavy in the air. They all knew the risks. The Council's reach was vast, their resources endless. The battle they were about to face was unlike anything they had ever encountered. And yet, despite all that, Xander saw something in their eyes, a spark, a fire that refused to die. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for a future that Earth's children might shape. Eris nodded and motioned to the others. They had work to do. Their enemies were already moving, and they couldn't afford to waste time. "Where do we start?" Eris asked as she began to gather her gear. "We need to move fast if we're going to outpace them." Xander stood motionless for a moment, his eyes narrowing. The message from the Council was not just a warning, it was a declaration of war. They didn't want Earth to survive, no, they wanted to suppress it, to steal its future before it could rise up. But Xander wouldn't let that happen. Not again. "We go to Earth's heart," he said finally, his words sharp as a blade. "We go to the children." He turned and made his way to the exit. Eris and the others followed closely behind, their footsteps echoing in the cold, metallic corridor. It was time. Time to take the fight to the Council and stop them before they could execute their plan. As they boarded their ship, Xander couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. There were too many eyes on Earth, too many forces ready to strike at any moment. He had made enemies, powerful ones. The Council had made it clear that they would stop at nothing to subdue Earth's children, and that meant no one was safe, not even those who fought against them. "Xander," Eris said, breaking his reverie. She stood beside him, her face a mask of determination. "Are you sure about this? If we go after the children directly, it's going to get ugly." "I know," Xander replied, the weight of his words settling like a stone in his gut. "But we don't have a choice. The Council's already mobilized. If we don't act now, we won't just lose the children, we'll lose Earth. The ship's engines hummed as they began their descent toward Earth's atmosphere. The sky above them was dark, the stars distant and cold. The vastness of the galaxy felt oppressive, a reminder of just how small they were in comparison to the empires that ruled over it. But Xander wasn't worried about the size of the enemy. What mattered was their resolve. Where do we land? Eris asked, breaking the silence. Anywhere we can. We need to move fast and keep low, Xander replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. He felt a sudden sense of urgency, a pressure that seemed to build in his chest. They were running out of time. The council would be closing in soon, and if they didn't act quickly, the children would be lost to them forever. As the ship touched down, Xander felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. The first step toward reclaiming the future. Stay sharp, he said to the crew, his voice commanding and steady. The council doesn't give up easily. We'll need to stay one step ahead if we're going to win this. The doors to the ship opened with a hiss, and the team stepped out into the night. Earth's soil was cold beneath their boots, the wind biting at their skin. But none of that mattered now. They were here, on the front lines of a war that would determine the fate of humanity. Let's move, Xander said, leading the way. As they moved through the shadows of the broken city, Xander's mind raced. The children were the key, but they couldn't just take them, they needed to protect them, to give them a chance to choose their own future, and that meant one thing: they were going to need more than just firepower. They were going to need strategy, cunning, and the strength to fight back against an empire that believed it was untouchable. Xander's hand hovered over the hilt of his weapon. They wouldn't stop. He wouldn't let them. Not this time. Not again. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them as they continued their trek through the darkened streets. The tension was palpable, the air thick with the weight of what was to come. But for the first time in years, Xander felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The battle for Earth's future had begun. Xander felt the weight of the world pressing down on him as he and his crew moved through the darkened streets. The city was eerily silent, broken only by the occasional crack of distant gunfire. Every step they took was a reminder of the stakes. Humanity's future was hanging by a thread, and there was no time to waste. The Council's forces would be on the move soon, and the children they were trying to protect were scattered all over Earth, vulnerable and unaware of the danger coming for them. We need to move faster, Eris muttered, checking her weapon as they passed through a collapsed building. Her voice was sharp, her eyes scanning every corner. She didn't need to say more. Xander knew exactly what she meant. They were running out of time. The Council had already launched their operation to hunt down Earth's children, those gifted with powers that could change the course of the galaxy. Xander knew they couldn't afford to fail. These kids weren't just important for Earth, they were the key to survival in the galactic order. If the Council had their way, they would capture the children and bend them to their will. We'll need to split up, Xander said, his voice steady despite the tension that gripped him. You and Rin take the west sector. Tessa and I will head for the east. Eris gave a quick nod. Understood. We'll move fast, make sure no one gets left behind. Xander turned to the rest of the crew. Remember, we're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for the future of Earth. Every child we protect is a step toward defeating the Council. The team set off, splitting into two groups. Xander's thoughts returned to Lila, his daughter, still lost somewhere within the chaos. He had to find her, protect her from the Council's wrath. But time was running out. He couldn't afford to think too much about the past, about the way they had taken her from him. He had to focus on the now, on the mission at hand. They moved quickly, weaving through the wreckage of old buildings, staying low to avoid detection. The air was thick with dust, and every crack in the pavement seemed like a potential danger. Xander kept his weapon close, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. He had been in enough combat situations to know that silence often meant something was lurking just out of sight. Xander, Tessa's voice broke through his thoughts. We've got movement. He tensed, signaling to the rest of the team to fall into position. A small group of Council soldiers had appeared from the shadows, their heavy boots pounding the cracked pavement. Xander's pulse quickened. They had been too careless, too slow. They couldn't let them get any closer. On my mark, he whispered to Tessa. We take them out fast. No hesitation. Tessa nodded, her eyes narrowing as she aimed her weapon at the approaching soldiers. The council's troops were formidable, trained to hunt down and eliminate any threats. But they had underestimated the resistance. Xander wasn't about to let them take another step toward their goal. Now! Xander shouted. In an instant, everything exploded into chaos. Shots rang out, filling the air with the deafening sound of combat. Xander fired first, hitting one of the soldiers square in the chest. The others returned fire, but Xander and Tessa were already moving, dodging the blasts and picking off the soldiers one by one. The ground beneath them shook with the force of the gunfire, and the streets seemed to come alive with the roar of battle. Xander's heart raced, but his mind remained sharp. He couldn't afford to miss. Every shot counted. He ducked behind a broken wall for cover, his weapon raised as he took aim at another soldier. The man went down with a single shot, but there were more. Always more. Xander, we've got to move, Tessa called out, her voice strained but determined. They're calling in reinforcements. Not yet, Xander replied, his voice low. We finish this. Another soldier emerged from behind the debris, firing in their direction. Xander dropped to the ground, narrowly avoiding the blast. He returned fire, the soldier crumpling to the ground in a heap. But the sound of more footsteps approaching signaled that they wouldn't have much time before they were overwhelmed. Retreat! Xander shouted, pulling Tessa to her feet. We need to fall back. Now! They sprinted through the streets, narrowly avoiding the incoming fire. The council's forces were relentless, but they were getting closer to the children. Xander knew that they couldn't afford to stop. They had to press on. Every second counted. As they regrouped with Eris and the others, Xander's mind raced. They had made it out alive, but the council wouldn't stop. They would keep coming until they got what they wanted. But Xander couldn't let that happen. He wouldn't let the council take Earth's children, not again. We need to find them, Xander said, his voice hard and determined. All of them. There are only hope, we'll find them, Eris replied, a fire in her eyes. But we can't do this alone. We need more allies. Xander's eyes narrowed. She was right. They couldn't take on the council's forces by themselves, not with the resources the council had at their disposal. But who could they trust? Who could they turn to for help? Let's head to the safe house, Xander said. We'll regroup, plan our next move. The team moved quickly, their steps echoing through the silent streets. Xander couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The council's spies were everywhere, and they wouldn't hesitate to strike when the time was right. But they had no choice. They had to find the children. And they had to do it fast. Hours later, they arrived at the safe house, a small, hidden bunker beneath an abandoned building. It was a far cry from the sleek, high-tech facilities the council used, but it was secure. For now, that was all that mattered. Inside, the team gathered around a table, their faces grim as they reviewed their next steps. Xander couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency building in his chest. The council wouldn't give up. They couldn't afford to wait for reinforcements. They had to act. We need to find the children, Xander said, his voice unwavering. They're scattered across the planet, but we can't let the council take them. We've got to protect them at all costs. Eris nodded. We've got the intel. The council's forces are closing in on their locations. Xander looked at the map in front of him, tracing the dots where the children were believed to be hiding. They were scattered across different regions of Earth, hidden from view. Some were in the heart of urban areas, while others were deep in the wilderness, far from civilization. It didn't matter where they were. Xander would find them. We split up again, Xander said, his voice firm. We'll cover more ground this way. But they'll expect that, Eris cautioned. It's too risky. Xander met her gaze. We don't have a choice. The mission was set. The team would move quickly, sweeping through the areas where the children were believed to be hiding. They would strike hard and fast, taking out any council forces in their path. Xander knew it wouldn't be easy. The council had the resources to outlast them, but they had one thing the council didn't, the will to fight. As they prepared to leave, Xander glanced at the map once more, a sense of determination settling over him. The children were the future. And no matter what it took, he would make sure they had a chance to shape it. "Let's move," he said, his voice resolute. The team nodded, and without another word, they disappeared into the shadows, ready to take on the council and protect Earth's children. Certainly. Below is Section 3 of the story, continuing from the previous sections with an emphasis on engaging dialogue, character development, and plot progression. Xander's pulse quickened as they approached the target zone. They had been moving for hours, staying low, avoiding the council's scouts and mercenaries. But now, standing on the edge of a dilapidated city, he could sense the gravity of their mission. The children were nearby. He could feel it in his gut, the sharp pull of urgency that would not be ignored. "We're close," Eris said, her voice low but firm, her gaze fixed ahead. Her hand hovered near her sidearm, always ready for the next move. Xander nodded. The map had shown a cluster of signals indicating where the children were believed to be hiding. There was no time to waste, the council's operatives were closing in fast, and if they didn't act now, they would lose the element of surprise. "Team, stay sharp," Xander said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "We're getting in, we're getting out. Protect the children at all costs." The team moved as one, slipping through the shadows of ruined buildings. The city was deserted, save for the occasional flicker of movement from far-off windows. It was a ghost town, ravaged by the council's earlier operations. Xander felt the tension rising. Every step they took toward the children was a step deeper into enemy territory. As they rounded a corner, the distant hum of engines cut through the silence. Xander froze, signaling for the team to halt. His hand clenched around his weapon, eyes darting to the source of the sound. "It's them," Tessa whispered, her eyes scanning the area. "Council troops, closing in fast. Eris, take the left. Rin, you're with me on the right," Xander ordered. "Move quick, don't engage unless necessary. We don't want to risk them hearing us." Without a word, the team split up, disappearing into the rubble. Xander's heart beat loudly in his chest as he moved toward the opposite end of the alley. There was no time for hesitation. They had to act before the council's forces realized they were there. As he reached the corner, Xander peeked around the edge. A small group of council soldiers patrolled the street, their weapons drawn, their eyes alert. Xander cursed under his breath. They were too close. If they were spotted, the whole mission could be compromised. "Rin, now," Xander whispered into his communicator. From the opposite side, Rin leapt from his position, taking down the first soldier with a swift strike to the throat. The rest of the team moved in, executing their moves with precision, incapacitating the remaining soldiers one by one. Within seconds, the alley was quiet again, the bodies of the council soldiers left in the dust. Xander didn't pause to check their status. He moved quickly, rounding the corner and heading for the building that was supposed to hold the children. His heart raced as he neared the entrance. He knew the stakes: if they didn't get to the kids now, they'd be lost forever. The door to the building was reinforced, but that wasn't going to stop them. Xander turned to Eris. "Blast it," he said. "We don't have the time to hack through the security. We're going in loud." Eris nodded without hesitation. "On it." Within moments, the door was blasted open, the explosion ringing in their ears as the team surged forward. Xander's eyes scanned the interior, his pulse pounding. The building was abandoned, its hallways dark and quiet. The children had to be somewhere inside. "Move," Xander ordered. The team spread out, covering every corner of the building. The scent of dust and decay hung heavy in the air, but there was no time to focus on that. "We're not alone," Tessa said, her voice suddenly tight. "There's someone else in here." Xander froze, his hand tightening on the grip of his weapon. It was too quiet. "Too still. Stay alert," he said. "It could be a trap." They pressed forward cautiously, each footstep measured and deliberate. Every door they opened was met with silence. But they knew they were getting closer. The children had to be here, somewhere. A scream shattered the quiet. It was faint but unmistakable, followed by the sharp crackle of static over the comms. "They've found them," Xander growled. "Move!" They took off at a sprint, following the noise as it grew louder. The building seemed to stretch on forever, a labyrinth of corridors and rooms. Xander's eyes darted from side to side, every instinct on high alert. As they turned a corner, Xander skidded to a stop. There, at the end of the hallway, stood the children, 4 of them. Young, scared, their eyes wide with terror. They were bound, their bodies shaking, their hands held in place by glowing energy cuffs. Behind them stood a figure. A council officer, tall and imposing, with an armored suit that glinted in the dim light. He held a weapon at the ready, aiming it directly at the children. Xander's blood ran cold. The officer's helmet obscured his face, but Xander knew he was no ordinary soldier. This was someone higher up in the chain of command, someone with the authority to end the children's lives if necessary. "Don't move," the officer ordered, his voice smooth but cold. "Step back or I will fire." Xander's hand twitched at his side. He could feel the tension building in his chest. There was no hesitation in him. There was no second-guessing. The children's lives were on the line, and there was only one way this was going to end. "Let them go," Xander said, his voice low but filled with deadly conviction. The officer's laugh was low, mocking. "You really think you can stop us? The council's plan is already in motion. These children are no longer of any use to you." Xander's eyes narrowed. "You're wrong. They're not yours to control." Without warning, he raised his weapon, firing a shot that hit the officer's shoulder. The force of the blast sent him stumbling back, and the children shrieked in fear. "Get them out of here!" Xander shouted, turning to Eris. "Now!" Eris wasted no time. She rushed forward, using a blade to cut through the cuffs holding the children. Xander turned his attention back to the officer, who was recovering quickly, his weapon drawn. The two exchanged fire, each shot carefully aimed and timed. The sound of weapons clashing filled the air, but Xander didn't waver. He was faster, more precise. The officer finally collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. "Go!" Xander ordered again, his voice filled with urgency. The children, now freed, looked to him with wide eyes, but Xander didn't have the time to reassure them. He couldn't afford to let the council win. Tessa led the way as they ushered the children out of the building, moving quickly through the halls. The team moved in a tight formation, covering each other as they made their escape. Xander's heart raced in his chest, but his resolve remained unshaken. They had saved the children. But the war wasn't over. The council would be back, and next time, they wouldn't be so merciful. The adrenaline still surged through Xander's veins as they reached the exit of the building, the children in tow. His pulse thudded in his ears, the distant sounds of pursuit echoing from behind. The escape had been too close, but they weren't safe yet. The council wasn't one to forgive mistakes, and the officer they'd taken down wasn't the last of their forces. He knew it wouldn't take long for reinforcements to flood the area. "Move!" Xander barked, pushing the children forward, urging them faster. "We need to get to the rendezvous point. We can't stay here." The children, terrified but obedient, stumbled over debris as they ran, their eyes flicking nervously to the shadows. Xander could see the fear in their faces, and it gnawed at him. He had promised himself that no matter the cost, he would protect them. But that promise felt heavier with every passing second. The council wouldn't rest until every last one of them was captured, and he wasn't sure how much longer they could keep fighting. Eris kept close, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. "We need cover. They'll have aerial support soon. We can't outrun them for long." Xander nodded, his mind working at full speed. He knew she was right. The streets were wide open, and they were too exposed. If they didn't find cover fast, they would be sitting ducks. He took a sharp turn, leading the team down a narrow alleyway. "There's an old maintenance tunnel up ahead," Xander said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We'll take that and head underground. They won't be able to track us as easily." "Got it," Eris replied, her voice clipped with urgency. They pushed forward, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the enclosed space. Xander's eyes were locked on the entrance to the tunnel, but in the back of his mind, he couldn't help but think about the children. They were safe for now, but for how long? The power they carried made them targets, and the longer they stayed on the run, the higher the risk that they'd be captured, or worse. They reached the tunnel's entrance, and Xander quickly ducked inside. The dark space offered them a moment of respite, and he motioned for the children to stay close. As the last of them entered, Xander pulled the heavy metal door shut, sealing them in. For a moment, there was silence, save for the sound of ragged breaths. "We've bought ourselves some time," Xander said, his voice hoarse as he wiped the sweat from his brow. "But we're not safe yet. We need to keep moving." "What's the plan?" Eris asked, her eyes never leaving the entrance. "We head south," Xander replied. "There's a resistance cell stationed near the border. We can regroup, get reinforcements. They can help us protect the children." Eris gave him a hard look. "And if the Council's forces are already there?" "We fight." "We'll have to," Xander said, his voice resolute. "We don't have a choice." The children were huddled together, their expressions uncertain. One of them, a boy no older than 10, looked up at Xander with wide, scared eyes. "Are we going to be okay?" the boy asked, his voice trembling. Xander crouched down to meet his gaze. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you. I promise." The boy nodded, though the fear didn't leave his face. It hurt Xander more than he wanted to admit. But he couldn't afford to dwell on it. The Council was out there, and every minute they stayed in the tunnel put them one step closer to being trapped. "Stay close," Xander ordered as he motioned for the team to move again. "We're heading south. Keep it tight." The group continued through the tunnels, the sound of their footsteps reverberating in the damp, oppressive air. Xander's mind raced as they moved, calculating their next steps, weighing the risks. He had learned over the years that hesitation could cost lives, but it was harder now, with the children in tow. Each decision, each step, mattered more than ever before. It wasn't long before they reached the tunnel's exit, emerging into the darkness of the night. The city around them was still, the streets deserted as they slipped through the shadows. Xander's instincts told him to keep moving, to stay one step ahead, but as they reached the outskirts of the city, he froze. A familiar, chilling sound reached his ears, the unmistakable hum of Council ships overhead. Xander's heart sank. They had found them. The Council's aerial patrols had tracked them down. "They're here," Eris said, her voice tense. "We're running out of time. Move! Get to the cover of the trees." Xander ordered, his voice sharp. The team sprinted for the nearby forest, the sounds of the ships growing louder with every passing second. Xander's mind was a blur of calculations. They couldn't outrun the ships, they had to hide. If they could just reach the cover of the forest, they might have a chance to break contact, to slip past the enemy lines. They reached the trees just as the ships descended, their searchlights scanning the area. Xander signaled for the team to stop, pressing his back against the thick bark of a tree. They crouched low, holding their breath as the Council ships passed overhead, their engines roaring like predators in search of prey. Xander's chest tightened, but he didn't move. He had to trust his instincts, trust that the children were safe. But the longer they waited, the more exposed they became. The tension was unbearable. It felt like hours before the ships moved on, but in reality, it was only a few minutes. Once they were clear, Xander motioned for them to move again, and they slipped deeper into the forest. "We need to get to the resistance," Xander said, his voice strained. "We need to protect them. We need to fight back." Eris nodded. "We'll make it." The team moved quickly through the forest, staying low and avoiding the patrols that were still searching for them. Xander could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had made promises, to the children, to himself, that they would survive, that they would defeat the Council. But with every passing minute, the task felt more impossible. The Council had vast resources, and their grip on the galaxy was tightening. How much longer could they fight? As they neared the resistance cell's location, Xander's thoughts shifted back to Lila. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about what the council had done to her, about the power they had taken from him. The thought of his daughter, now a weapon in the hands of those who had taken everything from him, twisted in his chest. But he wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. "We're almost there," Xander said, his voice steady but firm. "We're going to get through this. For Earth. For the children." Eris gave him a determined look. "We're not alone in this, Xander. The resistance is with us." "And we're with them," Xander replied, turning to face her. "We're not going down without a fight." They continued forward, the team moving with renewed purpose, ready to confront the next battle. The war wasn't over yet, and Xander wasn't going to stop fighting until the children, and Earth, were free. Xander's boots hit the ground hard as they emerged from the dense forest and into the clearing where the resistance cell had set up. His eyes scanned the area, searching for signs of life, for movement. The air felt thick with the tension of their pursuit. The children were with them, still safe, for now, but he knew how quickly that could change. "We're here," Xander said quietly, as the rest of the team gathered around him. His voice was steady, but his mind was already running through the next steps. The council wouldn't stop. They couldn't afford to be caught off guard again. Eris moved up beside him, her hand resting on her sidearm. "There's no sign of the resistance. Are you sure they're here?" "I'm sure," Xander replied, his tone unwavering. "They've been hiding out in these woods for weeks. They'll be here." Tessa, who had been keeping watch, turned to face them. "There's movement ahead," she said. "One, maybe two. Could be them." Xander's heart skipped a beat. His thoughts immediately went to the children, who were still huddled behind them. If the resistance was compromised, they were all at risk. He couldn't afford to let his guard down now. "Stay low," Xander ordered, his voice low and firm. "No unnecessary risks." The team moved in a tight formation, sticking to the shadows and remaining as quiet as possible. The rustle of leaves underfoot seemed louder than usual, each step carrying the weight of their survival. The faint sound of voices reached Xander's ears as they approached the small clearing ahead. "Don't let them get close," Xander muttered, his eyes narrowed, his focus razor-sharp. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the trees, a man, clad in tattered armor, his face grim but resolute. Xander tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. "Hold," Eris whispered, grabbing his arm. "We don't know if it's them or not." The man stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Xander's. He took one look at the team and the children behind them, then nodded. "You're the ones they've been talking about. The ones who've been fighting back." Xander lowered his weapon, but he didn't relax. "You're with the resistance?" The man smiled grimly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "We are. You must be Xander Kane. We've been waiting for you." "We need your help," Xander said, stepping closer. "The council's forces are closing in. We can't hold out much longer. We need to get the children to safety. Can you help us?" The man glanced behind him, then nodded. "We can provide cover, but it won't be easy. The council has more forces in this area than we expected. We've already lost 2 of our best men to a raid this morning." Xander's jaw clenched. They were running out of time. Every minute that passed made the situation more dangerous. But he couldn't let fear dictate his actions. Not when the children's lives were on the line. "Show us the way," Xander said, his voice hard. "We'll make it through. Together." The man gave a short nod and turned, leading them deeper into the woods. They moved quickly but cautiously, the trees around them offering little cover as the sound of distant council ships grew louder. Xander could feel the weight of the mission pressing on him. This was their last chance. The Resistance's base would be their final stand. If they couldn't make it, they wouldn't survive. Minutes passed, then hours, the tension never easing. They reached the base, a series of underground tunnels and hidden bunkers deep within the forest. It was a tight squeeze for everyone, but it was better than being caught in the open. Inside, Xander breathed a sigh of relief. For a moment, it felt like they were safe. But he knew better. The war was far from over. The real battle had only just begun. The resistance members moved quickly, securing the perimeter and making sure that everyone was accounted for. The children were given a small room to rest in, their faces still pale with fear but relieved to be out of immediate danger. Xander watched them for a moment, his heart heavy. They had done what they came to do, protect the children, save them from the council. But the road ahead was fraught with danger. He knew that. Eris approached, her face grim. "We've got a problem," she said quietly, her eyes never leaving the children. "The council's forces are everywhere. They've started closing off the routes. There's no way out unless we go through them." Xander nodded. "Then we fight through them. We'll push them back." Eris shook her head. "We can't. Not without more reinforcements. We don't have the manpower. If we try, they'll wipe us out." Xander clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. He wasn't about to let that happen. Not after everything they had been through. Not after what they had lost. "We have no choice," Xander said, his voice low but filled with determination. "We fight. We push them back, and we find a way out. We don't stop until the children are safe." Eris hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I'm with you." Tessa walked up to them, her expression serious. "The children are depending on us. We can't let them down." Xander turned to face the group, his gaze hard and unwavering. "We've made it this far. We've fought for this moment. We're not going to let the council take everything from us now. We fight for Earth. For the children. And for each other." There was a moment of silence, the weight of his words sinking in. Then, slowly, the others nodded. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something greater. A future where the children could grow up free. A future where Earth could rise from the ashes. "We'll make it through," Xander said, more to himself than to anyone else. He knew the road ahead would be perilous, but he wouldn't stop. Not until every last child was safe. Not until the council's tyranny was broken. The team gathered their weapons, their resolve strengthening with each passing moment. They were ready. And with that, they set out once more, determined to fight to the bitter end.